Well, howdy ho there, everybody. How are we doing today? Hopefully, you're all doing absolutely peachy keen, fantastic, absolutely wonderful, full of the delicious juice of the Lord. So this week we're doing something a little bit different, slightly different. Basically, I was recording for Elden Ring, and I was fighting Malekith, and that's one of the few bosses that still really gives me trouble sometimes. And I think sometimes it's because I forget to take off the Radigan Source Seal. I think that's kind of what it was in this case a little bit. Because I like those extra levels, but it does hurt. But anyway, I was getting a little bit frustrated, and then I was like, wait a minute, we don't want to get frustrated. That's not fun. And then, I just kind of decided that maybe we would do something a little different. And I saw this game was available. This is a liminal space game called Pools, Pools, but it's all capital. So those capital letters. Yeah. And you just type in Pools game or Pools into Steam, and you'll get this one right away. And I want to talk about a couple of different things, but I've always really liked liminal spaces for some reason. I just find them strangely kind of comforting. Except for the back rooms, but that's just because that reminds me of like a dingy office space. That's a little less comforting, a little bit more like, oh, I gotta file paperwork. And I'm like, no, I'm a magic cat. Magic cats don't file paperwork. I mean, we do, but that's beside the point. Anyway. And I'm a really big fan of pools. I've always really liked going to pools, and I like the ocean, and I like sea life, and I like all those things. So I figured, why not go and check this one out? And I wanted to talk about how sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, and how sometimes, our minds can make a heaven out of hell or a hell out of heaven. Not a mean Jimmy Dean. And what I realized was that sometimes, also I was trying to adjust the settings here. I'm trying to remember. There's something particular I was trying to adjust. I can't remember what it was. I was looking for controls because I wanted to see if there was any good controls. Basically, in this game, you're just walking forward. You're basically just walking forward. There's some slides and some cool things like that. But we have these moments where we allow our minds to like kind of dwell on things, and they will just like keep pulling them back up. And like anytime like there's like an intrusive thought or whatever, we tend to grasp onto it and hold on to it. And we really shouldn't be doing that. What we should really be doing is, at least, I think what we should be doing is going and dwelling in the Lord and dwelling in peace, rather than dwelling in things that make us upset or angry. And I was thinking about this, and for a long time, I kept, just as an example of something silly I did in my life, was I played a lot of the Warhammer tabletop game. I can't remember how many games exactly I played. And I'm speaking specifically of Warhammer 40k 10th edition. And I want to say, I mean, it was in the 70s, I know that, but I can't remember when the last game was. Maybe it's even on somewhere on this channel. I don't know, but I was playing a lot, but I wasn't really having a lot of fun with it. In fact, if anything, I was kind of bored a lot of the time. I personally found that my turns would go pretty quickly, and I would just be able to go, okay, bang, 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 that's what it's going to do. Okay, this didn't work, here, your turn. And sometimes people would just take a really long time, and other times it was like, just not really having a great time. Sometimes it was that, sometimes you lose real bad, it just feels not very fun. And other times, if you win like way too easily, like if you turn one table somebody, it's just like, oh, well, that's not fun for them anyway, and I had that happen a couple times. There were some reasons for this. One of the things that was going on was, I was mostly playing in the tabletop servers community and just playing on Tabletop Simulator, because I did have an orc army for a little while, but I never did a whole heck of a lot with it. This is partially just because of my schedule and like the times I'm awake and all these other things, and it would make it kind of hard. But I play a bunch of these things, and part of the problem was that some people in the Tabletop Simulator game, because you're facing different people all the time, and I didn't get too many games where I played the same person. Some people were ultra competitive. Some people were not competitive at all. Some people were basically experts at the rules. Almost other people were like coming to you and just, it almost seemed like they were just making stuff up. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't have issues with stuff like that, where I didn't occasionally either A, misread a rule, or I had this habit of scanning the rule and not necessarily always reading the whole thing, which I know that's pretty dumb to do, honestly, at a game like Warhammer 40k. But I would do it occasionally, and like one of the instances I remember that kind of mattered was that I was playing Eldar once, because I like Eldar, but everybody thought they were overpowered, so they didn't want to let me play them. Or they didn't want to play against me if I played Eldar, because it's like, well, they're really powerful. I'm like, well, maybe. I mean, I think they definitely have a really good toolbox. Oh, that's kind of weird. That's interesting. In the actual game, when I went up there, this staircase here, uh oh no, it wasn't this staircase. Never mind, I'm silly. For a second there, because I could have sworn that was one of the staircases I walked up where it was like pitch black almost. I do turn up the lighting a little bit later, and it turns out a lot of these places are actually a lot easier to see than you'd think. I don't know if it like just started the lighting too low. I mean, it started me at 70 FOV, so I don't know. Anyway, so I was playing with the warp spiders, and basically what you're supposed to do is there's a thing where they can move 24 inches, but you have to roll a die, and if you get a 1, they die. I don't know if it was because I didn't read the rule or because we were getting engaged in things, but I managed to not do that. I didn't roll for them, and it's like, okay. And you know, it's some rule flubs here and there, and you know, there's stuff like that. But eventually what I realized was that I was playing this game a lot, but it wasn't really making me happy. If anything, it was kind of making me frustrated or bored. Sometimes it was just kind of annoying because, you know, for a variety of reasons. Sometimes opponents were kind of rude. Other times opponents were just like not really. See, they seemed like they were playing a game for very different reasons. You know, sometimes I would get a little upsetty spaghetti if like a unit of mine just got completely tabled, like just like a gun just ended up being like way better, or you know, like people would interpret rules differently, so like I would do something and be like, okay, so these guys should be fine here, but then like, no, that's not how that rule works. And we'd go back and forth, and sometimes, you know, rather than sitting there and arguing with them for a long time, you're like, okay, fine, we'll just do it your way. And it would be a little annoying because then it was like, oh, are they arguing for this rule to get it in their favor, or are they just because that's how they think that actually works? And it was kind of a mess. But what I eventually just decided to do after a while of playing this game, like I said, 70 some odd games, I realized that I was A, not having fun, B, that I was kind of maybe making this person have less fun because I'm sitting here like trying to figure out what's going on, and if I'm not having as much fun, are they having fun? And some people, they don't care if you engage at all. Some people, they'll play, and if they're winning, they do not care what happens, not even a little. And you know, people would also do things that were, you know, kind of weird, blah 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 blah. Not gonna get into every single detail, but like what occurred to me after a while though is because I wasn't having fun, why was I continuing to do this? It doesn't feel very godly to, you know, embrace a game and, you know, do all these things and then just be frustrated with it. If I'm just frustrated the whole time, how is this bringing me bliss? How is this bringing me peace? How is this bringing me closer to the Lord? How is this bringing me closer to Christ? What am I doing here? And it's like, okay, so let's stop. So I took a break. And then after about a week break, I was like, maybe I'll go back. And it was just like, no, you know, like I played one game after that. I'm like, okay, I don't need to play anymore ever again, basically, is kind of what I decided. I have been trying out AOS a little bit recently because I might be getting some more free time to actually go to stores and play games. But then I played a game of AOS with a friend of mine who was really cool. And I was like, nah, this is the same thing. I like Warcry well enough. Anyway. But you see, we kind of do these things, right? Like, we will latch on to different things, and we'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to keep doing it. Like, by a couple of games in, I knew that I was getting kind of frustrated with Warhammer, but I was like, well, there has to be something worth it here. I like Warhammer so much, and I've always wanted to be able to play the tabletop game a bunch. But then, like, as I was playing it more and more, I just started to realize that, no, it's just not worth it. And we all do things like that. We all have these little habits that are, like, not like good for us. Sometimes it's as simple as like, oh man, we eat more than we should. Like, you know, like in the moment you're excited to get food. Like, I know people who will go to fast food places and always order too much food, and then, you know, sometimes I'm one of them. Hey. But you know, you order too much food, and then it's like, well, like your brain tells you you want this. You eat too much food and then you don't feel good, and you're like, oh man, I don't feel good. And then we have these cycles that will repeat. Sometimes they're very minor cycles. Sometimes they're like much more toxic. Sometimes they're much more like toxic relationships, or they're like you know someone's bad for you, but you go back to them anyway. Or, you know, something I've done in the past as well, and I kind of discussed this, I think, last week, is that I was very, very friendly with someone who was, well, maybe not very friendly. I was trying to listen and understand someone who just has a mindset that I think is just like, well, it's very hateful and it's very not great, but they're also just like an older person, and I thought they seemed kind of sad, so I was like, okay, I need to give them more of my time. But of course, you always got to come back to your own mental health and be willing to, like, you know, say, hey, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to engage in these conversations. And, you know, I eventually just, or I told them, like, hey, look, we just can't talk. Let's just not talk about politics or religion, which because every time they talk about it, like, it was just like, oh, everybody's going to hell if they don't do blah 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 and all this other stuff. Sometimes you just got to be able to set boundaries. Sometimes if it's specifically if it's people, you have to set boundaries, and you have to dwell in the Lord, and you have to go back to the Lord and be like, you know, Lord, I know that you're in everybody, but, you know, sometimes I have difficulty with certain things, and it's like, well, okay. And, you know, I still love everybody. I try to love everybody, and even the people who really try to get on my nerves, I really try to you know, think about, like, where they're coming from, why they are the way they are. And, you know, I also know that I'm not perfect, and I certainly get on some people's nerves. So, you know, it is what it is. And you got to be willing to embrace people and look past their difficulties and look past the things that bother you with them. And, you know, everybody's just a person. And, you know, some people really do have things that are going to cause conflict, or things that are like, some people just also just like conflict. But, that doesn't mean that you should engage, and that sometimes you gotta think about yourself a little bit and think about, like, where you're at in your spiritual journey. Sometimes you got to be willing to take breaks from crazy stuff and be willing to, you know, submit yourself just to God, and submit yourself, you know, like, give all of it up. And I often find that if I just, you know, tell Mock Ali, just like, Mock Ali, could you take this negative emotion away from me and make me feel better? She'll do it. She'll make me feel a lot better. It's actually really nice. I'm really glad that she's like that. Although you can see here when I turn up the lighting, it is so much easier to see now. The only time was kind of annoying in the game is that certain areas are really brightly lit, but so much of the game was so darkly lit that, like, to actually see things, like, look, now the water just looks like water. It doesn't look like a weird black sludge goo. So yeah, turn up the lighting, I think. But yeah, it does make it so, like, looking at certain things like that is maybe a little bit much. But you have to be willing to take these moments and you know, also, like, you know, think about yourself, think about, like, what is good for you, you know, and what's good for your spiritual journey. And telling Ma, like, hey, Ma, I need some help. She'll help me out, and she makes me feel better. And you know, it's also just like, sometimes you got to be willing to face problems in certain ways that are maybe unexpected, or really be willing to engage with people and try to be like, okay, look, you should always be civil. You should try not to be aggressive or rude with people. You should try to the best of your ability to, you know, be a beacon of goodness and not a beacon of negativity or anything like that. And I know sometimes that can be really difficult. Sometimes people are really pushing your buttons, or some things are really pushing your buttons. But a lot of this does come from, like, within ourselves. Like, if we dwell on the negative of somebody, like, you know, like, our minds will just generate thoughts. Thoughts will just appear, and they'll just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. And especially if you ever meditated, you'll really see this. Like, thoughts just kind of show up, and you can choose to sit there and really dwell on those thoughts. And what will happen is, if you grab onto a thought, that thought will now transfer into other thoughts, and eventually you have, like, a whole string of thoughts, and they can be very negative. It's just like, oh, well, I've never really liked that person anyway. You know why I don't like that person? And then you'll, like, enumerate their flaws and things like that. And that's not really something you should do. You should try not to focus on other people's flaws. Also, look, they have working slides in this game. I think that's pretty cool. But you should always be trying to, look for the positive, and also understand that, like, look, if you're at a point in your life where you just can't deal with somebody or you can't be around somebody, sometimes it is okay to be like, hey, sorry, I don't want to talk to you. If they're like a really toxic person, it is okay to be like, okay, I don't want to talk to you. Most of the time, you should try to see if you can find some kind of common ground, something you can talk about that's not like gonna be inflammatory for either person, if you can at all help it. And sometimes we also just need to take moments where we can like really breathe and gather ourselves. Like Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't remember, what is the book? I think yeah, this one. This book I have right here, Stepping into Freedom. Thich Nhat Hanh has all kinds of little meditative practices and things like that that are very, very helpful for this. Like, for instance, one of the little practices is like, before you pick up a phone, when the phone rings, take a couple of seconds, it's just a couple of quick in and out breaths, just like and just kind of relax a little bit before you pick up the phone with a smile. We're trying to be better to one another. We're not trying to engage in a negative fashion. And we have this tendency to find any excuse to be negative towards one another, or at least I know a lot of people who do have that tendency. And sometimes it can be very difficult and to actually be willing to do these different things and be willing to take a step back. But there is this line in I think it's a Guru Granth Sahib, which says that the vision of the knower of the divine is impartial, like the wind caressing a king and the needy alike. Like you should try to be as impartial as possible. Look, when we're not enlightened, when we're not like at those higher stages, it can be very difficult to be impartial. Because there are people that are gonna really vibe with you and really click with you, and then there's gonna be people who seem like they're really who are really kind of negative, right? Or are really kind of dragging you in ways that you don't really want to be. And then that's going to be a thing that happens sometimes. But we should be as impartial as possible. We should try to always be embracing God and everybody, because God is in everybody and everybody is within God. It's like when Ramakrishna talks about how I think I'm forgetting the exact wording, but but like he sees God in the sinner and the saint. He sees God in like the thief and the king and everybody else, like all the peasants. Like, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but basically it boils down to he sees God in the sinner and the saint. The person who does things that we would consider wrong and the person who does things that are like we consider saintly, God is still there within both. God dwells within all, God is all. So there's nobody that isn't touched by the Lord. And sometimes it can be difficult to remember that in certain situations, but we should always be trying to do things that increase our love and increase our kindness, rather than things that make us upsetty spaghetti. Like, part of the reason I stopped playing Warhammer is because, like, in theory, yeah, I liked like move my orcs or my Chaos Space Marines or whatever around. I like moving them around and playing the game, sure, in theory. And I have had instances where the games were fun. But if most of the time I'm either bored or kind of frustrated with the way the game works out, even when I'm winning, which towards the end there was a lot more winning and a lot less losing, because I figured out I always got better. But like, either way, like, then it's not worth continuing that. I'm not putting myself in a state of mind to dwell on God and to, remember God in this moment and every moment, right? I am putting myself into a situation where I'm not doing that, and I'm being more like negative overall. And then sometimes I would complain to my friends about the game afterwards, and several of them were just like, why are you playing this? It's like, it was like a weird habit that I had, and you can overcome. And this was thankfully it's not like an actual addiction or anything. This is like, okay, but yeah, no, we are going to stop that, and we're going to dwell on more positive things. We're going to try to meditate more. We're going to try and focus on God more. We're going to try and remember more. We're going to try and read more scripture, and we're going to try and thank God for being with us and giving us these mercies, and always kind of bringing us back to these present moments, these wonderful moments that we get to have, and being thankful and really trying to dwell in that is far more important. And sometimes it does mean that you got to cut certain things out of your life. Sometimes it does mean that look, I think ultimately if someone is in a quote unquote sinful life, I don't think you should judge them for it. I think that Jesus loved the sinners and the saints. I think that Jesus, hung out with the tax collectors and the sinners and ministered to them like he would minister to anybody else. And that I think that Jesus really loved those people and showed it. And, when the Pharisees came up to him and like, well, why are you doing this? Why doesn't your master hang out with just the holy people? It's like, well, who needs a doctor? Who needs a physician? Is it the person who's perfectly healthy or the person who is in sin? And it's like, well, of course, the greater point there, obviously, when you take that with other stories, is that like Jesus is, a doctor to all, not, and that we all have moments where we do things that we shouldn't do, and that Jesus is still the doctor at all, and that God is the doctor at all. God will accept you no matter what's going on, and we're not necessarily perfect in our current state, and we want to be better. But that's why sometimes, because God can look on everything impartially, and then the saint and the enlightened one can look on everything impartially. We're not necessarily there yet. We need a little bit more work to get there. And that's why it's okay sometimes to be like, okay, I can't do certain activities, or certain activities I think I should avoid, and things like that. And I would really strongly encourage you to look in your life and see if you think that there's something that you don't have to do that's causing you suffering or causing you to be upset. And I would strongly suggest that if you can at all help it, that you should, try to either limit exposure to those things or try to understand why you're doing those things, and always try to come back to God. Okay? Okay, well, I hope you all enjoyed that little video, and I hope you know that I love you and God loves you, and bye-bye, love you, bye. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful day, and I hope that you all feel the blessings of God. Okay, bye, love you, bye, God loves you, bye.